So we're continuing with the discussion of the Heart Sutra, and I think it's really useful to go back and do very quickly the point of the foundation path before we reconnect with the Heart Sutra and the Great Path. The point of the foundation path is that this sense of me is dreamlike. It is not solid. It is not a permanent thing. It is not like a rock. It is more like a river than a rock. And it's only as you begin to understand that, the foundation of the more like a river than a rock, that you can build this great path on top of. Right? So the Great Way builds on the foundation teachings. And last week we talked about the Heart Sutra as perhaps one of the most famous of the teachings of the Great Way, certainly one of the core teachings of the Great Way. That in there is a teaching that life is very vivid. Your experience is very vivid, but it's not a thing. So it's trying to actually look at this more like a river than a rock and go further and deeper and more penetrating, more personal. And last week we had a wonderful discussion about how vivid things were. And when you let go of holding on to safety and open up, life is much more, it touches you more. It's more compelling. It's more alive. It's more vivid. So further on in the Heart Sutra, there is the line, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, etc. And I just wanted to pick out that section of no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, and highlight that. And I was thinking how much we take for granted our identification with this physical self. And yet we know, which is why I asked at the very beginning, if as you answer the question, if you could naively answer the question from a very simple body point of view, what part of this am I identified with? So the question, which part of your body is most you? And we had hands and eyes and feet and face and belly, right? And torso, right? And yet, to go back to the very beginning, so I'm trying to give the punchline of the story or the point of the story before I go into the philosophy and the psychology behind it. Um, it certainly feels for me like I'm very identified with being able to see and with what I see, and what that goes to what I know. And I'm a highly visual person. Others, some of us artists, others for whatever reason, we're more highly in our fingers in the experience of touching and manipulating and creating. And others, someone else, it was the kindness of their feet, how their feet have carried them and supported them, and they're in that experience, or in the torso, right? Um, and we are actually, most of us, highly identified with different parts of our body, our face, right? That was one answer. Well, what would happen if you looked different? If all of a sudden, I hope this doesn't happen to any of you, but there was some kind of accident and you were disfigured on half of your face. Where did you go? If you're so identified with the physical, how different would you be? I mean, certainly there would be a difference. The difference would be very vivid. So the Heart Sutra does not does not say that you don't have a face. And when it says no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, etc., it's not saying you don't have any eyes. If it did, that would be sort of stupid. And the teachings are not stupid. Right? They're not denying reality. It's not saying that you don't have a nose, that you don't experience smell, right? Uh, but if you are so identified with your nose or your tongue or your hands or your torso, right, that you begin to turn it into a rock, well, then you're moving away from the teachings of the Buddha. So what's useful, I believe, in looking at the no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, is how much am I really identified? Like I actually psychologically go through my day feeling like I am this body. When you look in the mirror and you see yourself, you have the experience of how you appear at that moment. And it's how much of that do you turn into a rock? Oh, I am fill in the blank, looking good, put on some weight, need a shave, my hair's a mess, right? This doesn't fit me, as if me was the body, right? And how identified are you, or am I? And I believe that for many people, very is the answer. Very identified. So inside of the Buddhist understanding that the Heart Sutra is coming out of, there was a description of what actually the body is. And Chogyam Trungpa talked about it as there's the actual body. He called it the body. And then there's the psychosomatic body, right? And then something called the not body, right? I'm just going to talk about the body and the psychosomatic body. Like we think of, oh, I have this body. But for most of us, that's really just an idea. So in my question, when I asked, what part of you, and one of the answer was freckles, but freckles as a child, that's a remembered body. That's sort of psychological, because that freckled child is not who was answering the question, right? Um, you know, you might have a whole psychological idea of, I'm there have been times in my life when I've been very skinny. There have been times in my life when I've been overweight. I might look in the mirror and see the skinny person, right? That's a mental image. There have been times when I've been very skinny and I've looked in the mirror and seen the overweight person. Again, that's a mental image of the body. Um, you might look in the mirror, and all of us are aging, and you might see a much younger version of yourself in your mind's eye. I'm 69. If I look in the mirror and see my 30-year-old self, that's a mental image. That's not actually what's being reflected back, unless, that's just not reality, right? But I carry an image of my body. So that's the psychological body. But the actual physical experience, in Buddhist psychology, they would talk about, well, there's the organ or the physical part of your body. Let's do the eye. And there is what the eye perceives. So the eye perceives visual forms. I know this is going to sound very simple minded, but it's useful to sort of have in the back of your mind, of your awareness. The eye, for most people, does not perceive sound, nor does the eye perceive touch or taste. Right? It perceives visual forms. So there's the eye, its object, and the space that the eye operates in. The eye operates in the world of visible forms. It doesn't see the invisible, the auditory, the tactile, etc. Right? So there is an organ, an object, and its space. So later when it goes no I dhatu up to no mind dhatu, right? The dhatu is the space. So there's a physical experience of seeing. So right now, I'm actually looking at this computer screen with a little green dot that tells me I'm looking at the camera. That's what I'm seeing. I'm not actually seeing you, even though I'm talking to you, right? So you're in my mind's eye, but my physical perception is this little green dot, right? when I pick up something to touch, there is the organ of the skin with all of its, whatever we call tactile receptors, right? Sense, neurons or whatever, right? And then there's the pen that I picked up, which actually feels delightfully cool, right? And I love the feel of this. It actually, the top of it broke off where it would hang in my shirt, so that's a little bit rough. I can feel the roughness or the smoothness, or there's a direct physical sensation. And then there's the space in which skin and tactile object meet, which is the field of touch. Same thing goes for the nose. There is the olfactory sense of the nose and all of its associated structures. There's the field of that which can be smelled, and the olfactory field, the space in which aromas can be smelled. So eye, hands, nose, tongue, very similar. The organ of the tongue, its object is that which can be tasted, right? And then the field of tasting. And I'm missing one. Seeing, hearing. There's the organ of your ears and all of its structures, right? The objects are sounds. And just like you cannot see sounds, you cannot hear taste. The senses don't cross, right? So the ear has an object, which is sound, and then there's the field of that in which sound occurs. So what the Heart Sutra is saying is that for many of us, out of that experience of having an eye and seeing things, having an ear and hearing things, having a tongue and tasting things, having the ability to touch and feeling things, out of that we construct a rock. But actually what's happening, so let's keep it simple and just do eyes, is right now I'm looking at the green dot again, but just for a moment I looked away at the screen, right? I have a second screen here, right? And I wasn't at the dot. And that experience is constantly shifting. And even if I continue to just look at the green dot, it's now it's this green dot, now it's this green dot. It's not one thing that is constantly unchanging. So inside of the flow of experience, I might be able to hold my attention on an object, which is a very useful skill. But it's not just one solid experience that never changes. So the Heart Sutra over and over is going to try and point at the different ways that we solidify and try to open up that solidification. You might even say, help us dissolve the solidification so we can experience the flow. And here's where that's really helpful. You might have a very pleasant experience of sight, and then it changes and you feel sad because that thing that you really loved looking at is either gone or it's changed or ended, right? And then you begin to make a rock out of, oh, I really loved that. Or you might have the opposite experience. You might have experience of seeing something that you really dislike, that upsets you, that's painful, that reminds you of something that you don't want to think about. And you begin to hold on to the not liking. So there's so many ways the vividness of experience can be turned into a rock. And it's very helpful to understand it's not just one thing, that there is this process happening, like the eye seeing visible form and the ears hearing audible things, right? That knowing that it's a process helps you begin to let go. Last night, Margaret and I, here's one last thought, and then I'll be interested in what you think of this. Last night, Margaret and I were watching a TV series, and it's not really important which one it was, but the heroine, the main character in the series, has anxiety. And it was interesting how they portrayed the physical experience of anxiety, which was pretty accurate. She was experiencing shortness of breath and disorientation, and they were all very physical. And the key, which I thought that the actress portrayed quite well, she's working her way through this post-traumatic anxiety, is, to let yourself actually experience that it's more like a river. So take some deep breaths, take a quiet moment, let yourself get a bigger perspective, right? Not to hold on. So what happens for most of us when we get afraid is we clench, or we try to hold it away. And by holding it away, we actually try to freeze the moment and it becomes more like a rock. And it's useful from the point of the view of the Heart Sutra of like, oh no, let that flow through. Take care of yourself the way you need to take care of yourself. And this isn't intended as a diagnostic thing, what I'm saying. It's more of an observation of, this isn't just a bit of philosophy and psychology. It's like, oh, there are things where my life freezes, where I do get to be more like a rock. And then if I, practice noticing how they're constantly changing and made up of parts that keep moving, and the experience is very vivid, very compelling, and yet it's not one solid thing. It's constantly changing and moving. Then that helps me relax a bit, go back to my experience of awakened heart, and then be more present. So, with that, I'm going to pause this talk, um, maybe just with the last acknowledgement that when the Buddha gave this talk, and it's actually interesting, the Buddha says very little here. Most of this is Avalokiteshvara speaking, and it's as if he's inspired Avalokiteshvara to say the truth. And when Avalokiteshvara said this, um, it was very challenging because you could I've got the right posture, and I've got the right way to do it, and I know all the teachings, and I rock 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 rock. And it was like, let go, relax, let go, relax, open your heart, and then take a good look at what is vividly there and ask, what do I need to do next? So we're not denying that the world is here. We're just sort of suggesting, the Heart Sutra is suggesting it's different than it might appear. So with that, I'm going to pause the recording. Let's see if I can do that.